Hello, Tara here. Belle Island, Chapter 6. Alright, Benjamin and Isabel are both on the island. In the morning, Benjamin awoke feeling both refreshed and confused. He looked around, not recognizing the room or the foreign sound of waterfowl quacking and honking outside the window. The shutters were open and sunlight spilled inside, so different from the gloom of the afternoon before. When the doctor told him to rest, he'd never imagined he would sleep away the entire evening and all night as well. The journey and vertigo episode had clearly sapped his strength. He rose tentatively, testing out the strength of his limbs after yesterday's tremors, relieved to find them steady. Mortification heated his ears to think of how he had embarrassed himself upon arrival, showing his every weakness to Miss Wilder and her physician friend. Today will be different, he promised himself. He would make sure of it. Dressed in a nightshirt he barely recalled donning, he stepped to the window and looked out. He stilled, marveling at the view before him. Gone were yesterday's fog and gray pall. Everywhere was color, lush green lawns stretching down to a gently flowing river of a darker hue, vibrant yellow daffodils lining the bank, and blooming cherry trees adding splashes of pink and white. Across the Thames, the village of Riverton appeared a charming hodgepodge. Stone church with ivy-mantled tower, the mill and village shops, thatched and tile-roof cottages agreeably situated on a gentle slope rising beyond the road he'd arrived on. Crowded, sooty London seemed suddenly a lifetime away, a world of darkness and shadows compared to this vivid watercolor painting. Careful, he cautioned himself, remembering his purpose in coming here. This was no social call, however pleasant the prospect might seem, especially if the lovely scene harbored a killer. After he washed, he shook out a shirt from his small valise, wrinkled but clean, and dressed for the day, his hands thankfully steady when he shaved and fastened his buttons. As he tied his cravat into a simple barrel knot, the sound of a carriage arriving drew him to the window. A sleek chaise, driven by mounted postilion, crossed the bridge to the island. Anticipation coursed through him. Things were about to become more interesting. When Benjamin left his bedchamber a short while later, he walked along the corridor, noticing formal portraits of Wilder ancestors adorning the walls. A wide, carpeted staircase led him down to a grand entry hall with several doors and passages leading from it. Hearing female voices, he followed them toward an open doorway. From within, Miss Wilder said, "I am so relieved you are here at last. I began to worry. We expected you yesterday." "I know. I am sorry." Miss Lawrence's voice sounded tentative. "We were unavoidably detained." "The party went well, I trust." "Well enough, considering the last-minute change in location. But that's not why we are late. Aunt Belle, I'm afraid I have some rather shocking news." "If it is about Uncle Percival's death, I already know. It is dreadful." A moment of respectful silence passed. Then Miss Wilder asked abruptly, "What do you mean about a change in location? Was the party not held at our London house as planned?" Benjamin reached the threshold of an informal morning room. Inside, Isabel Wilder and Rose Lawrence sat companionably drinking tea, their heads near one another in animated conversation. Mr. Adair sat slouched, half hidden behind a London newspaper. Miss Lawrence shook her head, eyes sparkling with ire. "No! In the end, Uncle Percy refused to host it, bemoaning the expense." "But it is family tradition, just as we celebrated your parents' engagement there, and my parents' before that." "I know. I tried to explain, but he would not listen." "My dear, I am sorry to hear it. You ought to have written to tell me." "It all happened so quickly. There wasn't time. Thankfully, Christopher's parents stepped in and offered to host it in their home. What a mad rush it was, sending round notices and carting over extra dishes and the foodstuffs Mrs. Kittleson had already ordered." "Was it all terribly awkward?" Not too bad. I explained it by saying Uncle Percival's health was declining. Rose clapped a hand to her cheek. Oh! Never did I guess how prophetic that was. Rose looked back to her aunt, hand lowering. But it can't have been in the papers so soon. How did you hear about Uncle Percy? Clearing his throat to announce his presence, Benjamin stepped into the room. Seeing him, the young woman's mouth parted in surprise. Oh! Mr. Brooks, was it? Booker. Mr. Adair lowered the newspaper and scowled. What is he doing here? Benjamin adopted a casual air. Good day, Miss Lawrence. Mr. Adair. Pleasant journey? The two only stared at him in reply. Isabel breached the awkward pause and explained. Mr. Booker is a lawyer with Uncle Percy's firm. He came to give me the news in person. How are you feeling this morning, Mr. Booker? Better, I hope. Yes, thank you. Miss Wilder also looked more refreshed today, Ben noticed, her blue eyes bright and well rested. Mr. Adair snapped his paper closed. You wasted no time. I suppose you vultures are eager to get your name a new trustee? Concern dulled Miss Wilder's expression. Oh, I had not thought of that. Knowing Uncle Percy, he already assigned someone, Rose Lawrence pouted. Someone more controlling and miserly than he was. Miss Wilder pressed her niece's arm in mild warning. My dear, shh, let us hope not. She looked up at him. Are you here to unveil a new trustee, Mr. Booker? You did not mention it. He shook his head. No. First, there is the more pressing matter of Mr. Norris's death to deal with, and, he chose his words with purposeful discretion, who stands to benefit from it. But Miss Wilder turned to her niece and said bluntly, Mr. Booker knows Percival and I argued. He apparently thinks I may have killed him myself. What? Rose blurted. Benjamin braced himself for a verbal attack, but instead of the shocked outrage he expected, Miss Lawrence giggled. That's rich! You have taken a wrong turn there, Mr. Booker. And Belle? Can you just imagine her sneaking off to London, doing the deed, then sneaking back, no one any the wiser? The young woman bent forward at the waist, laughter shaking her slight figure. I am sorry, but it is too ridiculous. Mr. Adair, however, did not look amused. Rose, contain yourself. This is no laughing matter. Benjamin lifted his chin. Why is it out of the question? Your aunt admits she was angry with Mr. Norris and had reason to wish him gone. Rose looked at him, eyes alight, then looked to her aunt for confirmation. Does he not know? Miss Wilder shrugged uneasily. I suppose it's possible my reputation precedes me. Percival may have mentioned it. Mentioned what? Benjamin snapped, irritated to be the cause of Miss Lawrence's mirth and not knowing why. My aunt has not stepped foot off this island in almost 10 years. He turned to stare at Miss Wilder in disbelief. The London housekeeper mentioned she had not been to London in years, but nothing about this. Miss Wilder fidgeted and looked away, self-consciously rubbing her neck. Goodness, hearing it aloud makes me sound like a freak of nature. Clearly noticing her aunt's discomfiture, Miss Lawrence changed the subject. How long will you be staying, Mr. Booker? Not sure yet. A day or two, though I shall remove to the inn this morning. Miss Wilder straightened. Mr. Booker, about the trust. Is there a way to revoke it? Rose and I can look after ourselves. Taken aback by the unexpected legal question, Benjamin paused to consider. It would depend on how the original grantor, your father, I assume, created the trust. I would have to review the terms. Would you do that for us? I would be happy to cover your usual fees, of course. Mr. Adair hissed. Take care, Miss Wilder. I hardly think he is the best choice. Why do I not write to my father? His attorney would be more objective. But Mr. Booker is here, and a member of Percival's firm with access to the trust papers, wills, and any other documents he might need. Would you, Mr. Booker? I would like to know what lies in store for Rose and me and the estate. Do you not have your father's copy of the trust? Do you not have your father's copy of the trust documents? She shook her head. As far as I know, Uncle Percy had them, in London. Benjamin hesitated. Her request would give him an excuse to look through correspondence and papers and perhaps unearth some evidence in the bargain. Besides, the firm needed all the paying clients they could muster at present. Very well, he replied. I will see what I can find out. Isabel smiled at the man and thanked him, hoping it was not a mistake to invite him to remain there longer. Rose looked at their guest and said impulsively, If you are to stay, Mr. Booker, then you must attend our party. Isabel spoke up quickly, apology in her tone. Rose, I have been thinking. With Uncle Percy's death, I am not sure another party would be quite the thing. I am sorry he's dead, truly. I am sorry he's dead, truly, but he was only a distant relative. He controlled too much of our lives while he was alive. Shall he continue to control us? Okay, sorry. I'm trying to figure out who's speaking here. It's Rose. I am sorry he's dead, truly, but he was only a distant relative. He controlled too much of our lives while he was alive. Shall he continue to control us now by his death? He would have loved to be the cause of another cancelled party. No. Rose took Isabel's hand. I know you hated not Rose took Isabel's hand. I know you hated not being there with us in London, not acting as hostess for the traditional Wilder engagement dinner, and I know you have consoled yourself and me by planning a second party here. How much you have been looking forward to it. Rose leaned close. By the way, we passed Miss Trulock in the village, and she called out to us, telling us how much she is looking forward to it as well. Arminda Trulock was the vicar's daughter and Isabel's closest female friend, a spinster, like her, who enjoyed far too little society or amusement in her life. Isabel hated to disappoint her. She hesitated. Well, I suppose a dinner would do no harm, though I am not certain about dancing. Oh, we must have dancing, just like an old-time Reitach, Mr. Booker asked. Rare cock? Gaelic, a betrothal party, Isabel explained. A long tradition in our family. And we can't postpone it, Rose added, because I shall be an old married woman soon, and the time for celebrating betrothals shall be past. Isabel's stomach pinched, but she managed to smile for her beloved niece, who had so carefully raised the topic of her upcoming wedding. Isabel had hoped Rose would marry on the island, in the Manor's small chapel. But Rose had gently protested that the chapel was far too small for all the guests they and the Adairs would invite. Isabel had countered that perhaps they might marry in St. Raymond's across the bridge, and afterward come over to the island for the wedding breakfast, which Isabel would happily host for as many as wanted to attend. Rose had seemed amenable to the idea, but Mr. Adair argued that it was too far for all of his London relatives and friends to travel. Rose had ended the argument, saying they would discuss it later. But later was rapidly approaching. How could Isabel bear to miss her niece's wedding? Rose was more like a daughter to her than a niece, as she had all but raised her after her parents died. Her heart hitched. Why can I not get over this fear? Isabel decided she could not disappoint Rose again, nor herself. Very well. If there are no objections, we shall proceed with the party. Isabel looked from face to face, but no one protested. There! It's settled! Rose enthused. Isabel stood and started across the room. I shall let Mrs. Philpotts know, if you will excuse me. Mr. Booker followed her out. Your niece invited me out of politeness, I know, but you needn't include me. It isn't politeness alone, I assure you, Isabel sent him a sly grin. We could use another man to even our numbers. Have you evening attire? Not with me. Isabel's gaze swept his form in a measuring look. Fine, handsome features, deep brown eyes, dark hair with some curl to it, tall, well-built and lean, with a long torso and confident bearing. No matter, I think you are nearly my father's height, and men's fashions change so little compared to ours. I shall ask Mr. Adair's valet to pick something from among Papa's things to brush out and press for the evening. If you don't mind, that is. Not at all. Good. She hesitated. And since you will be remaining for the party and helping us with the trust, you might as well stay here on the island. There is no need to remove to the inn. One dark brow rose. Are you certain? Isabel nodded. Very well. Thank you. I think the perspective is changing because there's a break in the page. Miss Wilder started toward the kitchen, then turned back. Actually, since you are looking into the trust for us, I wonder if you might help me with something related to it. Wariness tingled through him. What might that be? Come with me. She led him to a masculine chamber dominated by a large mahogany desk, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lining the walls. This was my father's study. I use it now as my office. She shut the door behind them, opened the shutters to let in light, and began. You may recall I mentioned my father wanting to get his affairs in order before that last journey? Yes. I distinctly remember him telling me that he was revising his will that night, as it related to the trust. As a lawyer, you probably encourage people to write their last will and testament before setting out by coach. You know firsthand how dangerous road travel can be, as I learned to my great sorrow the next day. True. Papa had revised his will once already when he learned of Rose's birth abroad. That's when he set up the trust, to provide for me and Grace, and Rose through her. He named Percival trustee in the event of his death, granting him a modest stipend. We haven't much family, and Papa had no reason to question Percy's honor or ability at the time. But when he learned Grace's husband had died, and Grace herself was ill, he told me he thought it prudent to revise the terms so that if the worst happened, I would become Rose's guardian when I reached my majority, and the mistress of my own fate, instead of Percival going on as trustee indefinitely. After all, I was already 20 by that time. Did your father ever finish this newer will? That is the question. If he did, we never found it. Perhaps he meant to write it, but, in the rush to leave, neglected to do so. And in all honesty, I was not overly concerned about it initially. At first, Uncle Percy performed his role dutifully and remained in the background, uninvolved in our day-to-day lives. I raised Rose here with little interference until she moved to London. However, during one of Uncle Percy's recent visits, he spent hours in here, going through every drawer and file, looking for something. In fact, I came down at 3 in the morning for warm milk and found him still at it. He seemed quite concerned, frantic almost. You think he was looking for this will? I believe so. You mentioned your parents have been gone for over 10 years. Why would Mr. Norris suddenly be looking for a possible newer will? She ducked her head and said sheepishly, Perhaps because I hinted that my father had written something that dissolved the trust, which I would produce as evidence, effectively eliminating his position. But you don't have any such document. She shook her head. No, I was angry and scared and desperate. He was threatening to ruin my way of life, my island. I wanted to stop him. It was all I could think of at the time. I knew my father would never have stood for it were he here. And if he'd foreseen the underhanded things Percival would do, he would never have appointed him trustee in the first place. Benjamin wondered if threatening Percival Norris was all she had done, or had she carried out a more effective, permanent solution. He looked around the room, at the desk and cabinets. Would your father have left such a document here in his study? I thought he would have had it with him in the coach. I understood he planned to deliver it to the lawyers in London after meeting Grace's ship, but they never made it that far. Perhaps I was mistaken, for their valises were returned to us, and we found no such papers inside. Then again, I was consumed with grief, not thinking of mundane things like legal documents. Forgive me, but were your parents returned here as well? She winced. Yes, they are buried in St. Raymond's churchyard in Riverton. The undertaker returned a few personal effects to me. Papa's purse and watch, Mamma's reticule and ring, but no papers. Why are you concerned about this now that Mr. Norris is dead? Because if I do nothing, I will be saddled with another trustee and required to submit to a stranger controlling what I do and what I spend. A stranger who will dictate Rose's dowry and marriage settlement and all the rest. I need to know. Have I grounds to refuse such a successor, to be the mistress of the estate without outside interference? Is the estate not half Rose's? The island and the London house are tied up in the trust, I believe. But in the end, Rose is my heir, so she will inherit everything when I die in any case. I am not sure I would bandy that about. Why? Ben made a mental note of this possible motive, but decided to let it pass. Never mind. Getting back to your question. You're right. Your father, as original grantor, probably appointed a successor trustee in the event Mr. Norris was unable or unwilling to serve. Otherwise, the court must do so. But why do we need a trustee at all? Or a guardian, for that matter? Rose is not yet 18, but she is about to marry, and that, of course, means her husband will then own all of her property. True, unless a marriage settlement is enacted before the wedding. Which is why Percival was insisting on one, though the Adairs were not pleased with the terms. Benjamin nodded. Your niece is very young. It's not surprising Mr. Norris would think she needs a settlement to protect her, and an older trustee to advise her. And what about me? I'm 30 years old. I admit you seem altogether capable. Thank you. My goal is to preserve this house and the island for future generations, for Rose's children. And your own? She blinked her large blue eyes. I have no plans to marry at present. Does Dr. Grant know that? With a huff, she sputtered. You are impertinent. Forgive me. I am tactless, I know. She lifted her chin. Dr. Grant and I are old friends. His gaze traced her face, the graceful curve of her neck. He seems to admire you. She fiddled with the wax jack on the desk. Perhaps, yet we remain friends. I wonder why. She shrugged and avoided his gaze. Benjamin's heart softened toward her, and he instantly bristled. She was already casting her spell on him, just as Susan Stark had. Was he a fool to help this woman? Would he regret staying here longer, to be taken in by her? Then again, there might be unexpected benefits to being a guest in the Wilder house. He would have more access to the people who lived there, more opportunity to discover any secrets they might be hiding. He squared his shoulders, sliding into a professional demeanor as he would a stiff tailcoat. Very well, I will look for a newer will, and also research the matter of a successor. I will write to Mr. Hardy, our senior partner, and ask about the terms of the existing trust. Thank you. She extracted a key from the chatelaine at her waist and unlocked the desk and file drawers. Please do let me know what you learn. She departed, leaving Benjamin alone in the study, wondering how in the world he had come to be a guest among people he barely knew and trusted less. Until recently, he had thought himself good at reading people, of knowing whether someone was telling the truth or lying. But the Susan Stark case had shaken his confidence. Now he was not at all certain what to believe. Benjamin spent some time sorting through papers and then wrote to Mr. Hardy, asking about the terms of the Wilder Trust and letting him know he would be remaining on Belle Island for a few more days. He was sealing the letter when barking drew his attention to the window. From there he looked down and saw Miss Wilder frolicking on the lawn with 2 dogs. The old dog he'd seen before held a stick in his mouth, and Miss Wilder playfully tried to pull it from him. She skipped in a circle around the canine in an exuberant dance of sorts, smiling and laughing, while a puppy barked and chased after her. Isabel Wilder seemed to be a woman without affectation, not overly concerned about appearing proper or elegant. He found that refreshing. He found her refreshing. In the past, he'd harbored a somewhat prejudiced view of country rustics. Perhaps he'd been wrong. He squeezed his eyes shut. Don't jump to conclusions about her one way or the other. He might admire her spirit, but that didn't necessarily mean she was innocent of wrongdoing. After a few minutes, the old dog lay down and would not play for all her coaxing. Tongue lolling, he seemed to smile at the antics of his mistress and wagged his tail appreciatively. Finally, she gave up, tossed the stick aside, and patted the dog's head before leading the puppy back inside. A short while later, Benjamin left the house, planning to post the letter himself. As he crossed the wooden bridge to reach Riverton on the opposite shore, he decided the hamlet was an attractive place. Its homes were bedecked with climbing plants, and many boasted colorful spring flowers in their front gardens. One humble cottage near the church offered bouquets for sale. A village shop stood on the corner opposite, its window displaying a jumble of items to entice passers-by. Candles, tobacco pipes, tops and balls, sugar loaves, tin and hardware, buttons and tapes. Farther down the bank stood the old mill, its wheel churning the water white with foam. Beside the mill sat a wagon with red wheels piled high with sacks of flour. Its team of horses fed on a truss of hay. While the river road paralleled the Thames, a cross street led uphill away from it. There Benjamin saw his destination, the White Hart Inn, which also served as a local post office. It made an inviting picture with its warm yellow wash, red tile roof, and a courtyard where elderly people sat beneath an ancient walnut tree, gossiping over village news. Benjamin entered the inn and posted his letter. While he was there, he asked the innkeeper if he or a livery in the village offered chaises for hire if someone, like Miss Wilder, wished to go to London. The innkeeper looked at him as though he were daft. "You're not from around here, are you? Nearest coaching inn is in Maidenhead. That's where our post is delivered, and we pick it up with our donkey cart. But you won't get far in that." "No. Well, thank you." Errand completed, Benjamin entered the tap-room on a whim and sat next to a solitary silver-haired man. Hoping to glean a little information about the Wilders, he casually addressed the oldster. "Good day to you, sir. What's the news here?" The grizzled head turned, and rheumy eyes swept over him. "Not much. Never seen you afore." "I am visiting from London." "Then I hope you don't mean to stay long." Benjamin reared his head back in surprise. "Oh? Why?" "Foul weather coming. Almanac ain't always right, you know. Feel it in my bones. Gonna be worse than 11, or the flood of 8. The barman approached with a tolerant grin. Don't let Mr. Colebrook worry you, friend. He's always predicting doom and gloom." "Ach!" The man waved a dismissive hand. Lip curled in disgust. "You'll see I'm right." Benjamin ordered a coffee for himself and a second pint for Mr. Colebrook. His silvery eyebrows rose in appreciation, and he nodded his thanks. "Don't mind if I do." Benjamin sipped, then asked, "You have lived here a long time, I take it?" "That I have, young man. Since afore you was born, I wager." "This is my first visit. I am staying on Belle Island for a few days. I heard a rumor that the mistress hasn't left the island in 10 years. Surely that's an exaggeration." "No, sir. She likes to stay home. No crime in that." "I have never heard of such a thing. Is she ill?" "Not as such." "Then why, if you had to guess?" "On account of the curse. Any Wilder born on the island who leaves it dies young." "I heard about that. Surely no one really believes it." For a moment the old man's bleary eyes sharpened with suspicion. "What's it to you?" Benjamin shrugged. "Merely curious. You must admit it's strange." The old man's eyes narrowed, then cleared in resolve. He withdrew a coin from his pocket and pressed it onto the counter with a resounding snap. "I admit nothing, and I can buy my own pints and keep my own counsel, thank you very much. I suggest you do the same. You won't hear me say another word against the mistress. I regret I said anything at all. You said nothing unflattering, sir, I assure you. Please sit down. Pray, do not be offended. But the man rose on wobbly legs and walked out the side door to join the others in the courtyard. Benjamin sighed. What an oaf he felt. Apparently, he would have made a terrible barrister, pleading cases in court. His ability to question witnesses certainly left a great deal to be desired. People definitely know more than they are letting on, that's for sure. I have a theory. We'll see if it pans out.